Welcome to the Audit and Standards Committee. My name is Kate Rolfe and I am chairing this committee because the chair is currently on holiday. Alongside members of the committee, I'm joined by Ciara from Democratic Services, Marcia Eccleston on my left, Head of Law and Governance and Monitoring Officer, Richard Burrell, Head of Resources and 151 Officer, and Paul Clark, Warwickshire County Council Internal Audit Manager, and at the back I thought I saw Sam Slemenzek, Community Safety Manager, but I guess he'll come in later. Committee members, when invited to address the meeting, please ensure your microphone is switched on so that it is picked up via the live audio feed. When you have finished addressing the meeting, please turn off your microphone immediately. Please ensure you have switched off or to silent any other devices you have that may interrupt the proceedings. Please note that this meeting is also being broadcast live, and members of the public not in attendance today are able to view the proceedings. Now we move on to the agenda. Apologies for absence. Ciara.
We have apologies from Councillors Alcock, Ian Fradgley, Jenny Fradgley, Councillor Passingham, Mr Mike Dutton, Mr Edward McAllister Smith and Councillor David Roach.
And I believe we have to... sorry, Councillor Wally-Hoggins.
Yeah, Councillor Ian Shenton has contacted to say he's been delayed, but he's expected at the meeting. But he passes on apologies if he's not able to. There's some transport issues there. Thank you.
Thank you, and I've been notified by Councillor Ostrander that she will be 5 to 10 minutes late. Item 2, disclosure of interest. Do any committee members have any interest that they would like to declare in relation to items on the agenda? No, thank you. Right, let's move on to minutes of the previous meeting. If there are any points members wish to raise, please indicate, otherwise I will take the minutes as noted. Okay, thank you. Public participation, none received. Item 5 on the agenda, we're moving on, page 17 of your agenda, which is the Constitution Review. This report seeks agreement from Council to update the Constitution in the terms detailed in Appendix 1 to 11 to ensure it remains efficient and effective in upholding the law and good local authority governments. The recommendations to Council are that the changes to the Council's Constitution as detailed in Appendix 1 to 10 of the report be approved, and to note the changes to the Leader's Statement in Appendix 11 as approved by the Leader. I'll repeat those recommendations later. And so, councillors, I invite Marcia Eccleston to present her report to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the report before you, you will have had a chance to read it, so I wasn't proposing to go through each appendix stage by stage. Suffice to say that the body of the report explains why we're here. The requirement of my role is that there needs to be a regular review of the Constitution to make sure that we remain compliant with the law, and 1.3, 1.4, 1.5 of the report gives some background to that to explain where it is some of those requests for a review have come from. And to summarise, that has been in observing meetings, noting changes in practice and law, and receiving feedback from some members and officers as to changes that need to be made to make sure that we stay compliant with the law. So then we come to the appendices that have been referenced, which I'm sure you've had a chance to look at in detail. But I just wanted to flag, for instance, to you page 81, which is an example of just why some of those changes needed to be made. So at page 81 at 16.8, you'll see a track change, which is how we have made all the changes to the appendices so that you can see it for transparency purposes. There's a reference there to a change that we've had to include because it's compliant, it now keeps us compliant with the Licensing Act provisions of 2003. So if you look at 16.8, it's a new clause that we've included. A councillor should only have a right to speak if they have submitted representations in respect of the relevant matter in accordance with the requirements of the Licensing Act 2003. Likewise, and like I say, I'm not going to go through all of it because I know you'll have had a chance to read it, but at page 35, for instance, under the terms of reference for council, going over to page 36, there's a reference, a new reference to the terms of reference to consider petitions in accordance with the scheme for petitions with a link to the reference page. That's because we already have a process referencing the scheme of petitions, petitions which come to full council in there, but for some reason it wasn't included in the terms of reference, so we've now added it to the terms of reference. So it's those sorts of amendments that have been made and which we're hoping that you would endorse the recommendations to councils for. Of appendices number 11, which I referenced, which talks about the leader's statement. Of course, you know the leader statement is allowed by the Constitution to be changed in any event. So that's not seeking your approval, it is to note. But it makes sense that all of those items go to full council together because when read together, they make sense. Unless I can assist further, Chair.
Councillors, any questions, please? Councillor Wally-Hoggins.
Yes, I've been at many meetings lately where we've discussed the appointment of substitute members to a committee, and I'm just to a meeting. Can you explain, please, and perhaps I know the answer to this, but why we're not allowed to substitute members for Overview and Scrutiny Committee and the Audit and Standards Committee, please?
So regarding that particular point, obviously it's not part of the Constitution review today, but I am aware that that is something to be considered at a future committee meeting, including OSC as an agenda item.
Yes, please do.
So it's just to follow on that sometimes, you know, we all find ourselves not in a position to attend a meeting. So when I look at 8.3, forgive me, so I am allowed to appoint somebody to attend on my behalf, and then while I'm unable to attend, and then revoke that and change it back together. Is that correct? As long as everything is in writing, can I just clarify that?
Which page are you referring to?
I'm looking at page 24, 8.3.
24. 8.3.
Top of the page.
So at 8.3, the note that you're referencing is regarding overview and scrutiny, which I've already explained will be discussed elsewhere. And the sentence that you're referring to is, sorry?
It's, well, let's just talk about it in the round, really. The way that I've read it is if I wasn't able to attend a meeting as it stands at the moment, I could almost appoint a temporary person to be me, if you like, at that meeting, and then revoke that again, and then say, we've now changed it back again. Is that correct?
That's not necessarily how I read it. Where a political group wishes to substitute a representative of the group on a committee or subcommittee, written notice shall be served to that effect by that political group leader or his or their nominee in the circumstances. And then there's reference to the head of paid services, which, as you know, means that there's almost a long stop to make sure there isn't too much of that back and forth and constant change.
Okay, thank you very much indeed.
Any further questions, councillors? Councillor Keighley.
Thank you very much, Chair. This question probably Richard's best place to answer, and that was just in terms of head of resources, page 43, 8. It's the writing off or writing down of things in the accounts up to a maximum sum of 10,000, which has been reduced from 15. Just wondered if Richard could comment on that.
Maybe if I could just comment on that,
Please,
Chair.
yes.
In fact, this is referencing what's in the leader statement. The leader statement currently in Appendix 11 references that the portfolio holder for resourcing, as well as the Section 151 can write off to the value of £10,000. And in the Constitution, the actual figure was £5,000, so it wasn't consistent. So what we've tried to do is make it consistent now. I hope that helps.
Thanks a lot.
Any further comments or questions? Okay, thank you. So the recommendation to Council, if you're happy to take both of these recommendations at the same time, is that the changes to the Council's constitution as detailed in Appendix 1 to 10 of the report be approved, and to note the changes to the Leader's statement in Appendix 11 as approved by the Leader. Do I have a proposer, Councillor Wally-Hoggins, and a seconder, Councillor Keithley? Members, all those in agreement? Thank you, that's unanimous. So that is a recommendation to Council. Thank you very much. So, if it all goes as quickly as this, councillors, we'll be home for tea. Item 6, page 125 of your report, which is preparing for the introduction of the Procurement Act 2023. This report briefs members on the Procurement Act 2023, which is now due to come into force on the 24th of February 2025. A consequential review of the contract standing orders has been undertaken, and a new set of standing orders is recommended for approval. The recommendation to Council is that the report is noted, that subject to recommendation 3, the new contract standing orders at Appendix 1 are adopted with effect from 24th of February 2025, and the Constitution amended accordingly. And 3, that the monitoring officer be given delegated authority to make changes to the new contract standing orders to reflect any additional or revised statutory guidance published prior to the 24th of February 2025. I will now hand over to Marcia.
Thank you, Chair. So I am being very ably assisted, not by just me alone, but of course Marina Moss, who's I believe on screen at the moment. Yes. That's because the technical detail of the changes is more within Marina's gift than my own, dare I admit it. But in terms of the general overview, if I can just introduce and say that the following. This piece of legislation has been rather timely for us. It's meant that it's given us an opportunity to look at simplifying the rules on how we procure and enter into contracts as far as possible. And initially, when the paperwork was being pulled together for your attention, it was to be that this change in legislation was going to happen on the 28th of October. But we received recent notification to say that date's moved out to the 24th of February 2025. But getting ahead of the curve is still essential, because those principles are what we'll have to adopt going forward and are best practice now. And in fact, as Marina will go into a bit more detail if you have any more technical questions, you'll see that the actual new provisions in the appendix which is attached are actually more simplified than what were the appendices before on contract procurement. And so one of the things that we all wanted to see, for instance, was what isn't caught by the procurement rules. And now that's very clear in the new appendices that you have before you. And then there's more of I'm going to say, an easier read, an easier breakdown as to what we apply, when we apply it, and how we should apply it. And with that, I'll hand over to Marina, who, as I say, will know more of the technical detail if you have any questions.
Marina, would you like to say something? Good afternoon.
Well, I'd just like to endorse what Marcia has said, and hopefully that the new contract standing orders are a much easier read. We want all the officers involved in procurement within the council to have more of an understanding of the procurement journey. Because at the moment, the orders as they're drafted, they're very legalistic and they're not particularly helpful. So hopefully the new orders will help officers to understand the purpose of the procurement and the journey that it is, because at the moment, the way procurement works, it's all very much geared to our advertising that we have a tender and then contract award, and there's not enough attention paid to initial market engagement and seeing what is required and whether it's necessary. And also at the other end, there isn't a particularly great emphasis on contract management, and both of these elements are something that is given much more prominence in the new Procurement Act.
Thank you.
So if anyone has any questions on this, I'll be very happy to assist.
I think, Marcia, you want to say something as well?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Marina. I just wanted to add, as you would have seen in the report as well, that there will be training on these new provisions and the new rules if they are endorsed by yourselves. We're looking at certainly November, December time to do some of that training.
Councillors, do I have any comments or questions? Trevor.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask a supplemental question? I'm aware that there are a lot of parish councils that are doing Section 106 procurement at the moment, going through your Section 106 and SIL money. Will they also be expected to adhere to this now? And if so, will you be contacting the relevant councils like Burton, Dasset, I know, and Lighthorn to advise them of this change, and that they will be expected by you to follow this process when they're applying for their funds? Thank you, Chair.
Marcia.
Thank you. So I'm looking at page 137 of the appendix that I referenced. And right at the very top under A5, it says the following contracts and agreements are outside the scope of the contract standing orders. And it does reference planning agreements like Section 106 agreements. However, I should just add that there is already a lot of good work about training and joint training with the parishes, which is on its way as well. Okay.
Councillor Walling-Hoggins.
Yeah, if we go to page 143 to 3.2, the specification, source of supplier, can you tell me, please, how we have, if these are priority order for the specification, for the, I think it's 8 points here. Thank you. Oh, and how we've reached that order on that specification, please. Thank you.
Oh, Marina.
Yes, I'm not quite sure where we are with this. Sorry, if you could just.
It's page 143 of the whole papers, but that'd be page 9 of the report, and that's item 3.2, headed Stage 3, source of supplier, and we're under specification.
Yes, just bear with me. Sorry about this.
Shall I read it to you, Marina?
Would you mind while I'm trying to just...
So 3.2 specification, the team commissioning the services, goods or works is responsible for drawing up the specification. This must clearly and precisely set out the council's requirement and be of sufficient quality to enable suppliers to submit accurate and unqualified offers. The specification must be consistent with the National Procurement Policy Statement as well as council policies and strategies, including but not limited to the council plan and strategies and duties with regards to 7 bullet points here. Climate change.
Thank you, Councillor Rolfe.
Yes,
I found the section now. I'm terribly sorry, but if you could just ask the question again, please. What the...
Yes, go ahead, please, yes.
Yes.
So with those 7 bullet points, thank you for counting better than I did, Councillor Rolfe. With those 7 bullet points, how did we arrive at the order in which they're written down? Is that a priority list or is it a random list, please? Thank you.
It's a random list, and it's also likely that there may be changes to it consequent on the new National Procurement Policy Statement being produced. The new policy statement is the reason that the implementation of the Procurement Act has been put back to February. So this may change to an extent, but there's no priority ranking.
Thank you. Marcia.
If I could just come back in, Chair, and just add, which is why we've added recommendation 3, because we know this is all such new legislation. We need to be able to move with the times. So that's why the 3rd recommendation's been added, to allow for quick amendments to the contract standing orders as the legislation changes, or is updated.
Thank you. Any further questions, councillors? Councillor Ostrander.
Of the curve, especially thinking about this PRU unit who may be breathing down everybody's necks. I did have one question from page 11 of the report, or page 145 of the appendix. It relates to point 3.16, which is talking about the evaluation process, keeping records, etc. And towards the end of that, it says that the decision that's taken has to be based on the tender submission alone, which I understand that yes, I understand that. But then it says prior knowledge of a supplier must not influence the scores given. And I can see the point of that here, but I'm just wondering if there's another place that we would be able, as a council, to take into account suppliers who might have a poor track record with us, instead of being tied into having to reuse somebody.
Yes, Marcia.
I'm sure Marina will answer this in more detail than me, but what I can say is some of the new legislation that is being brought in is specific on that point. If there are issues about a particular provider or supplier, you'll see there's reference in the report to almost like a database being held in future, so that, if you like, there's more awareness and transparency on those issues. And just a more general point, which I'd probably add, is that there's still, within the procurement rules and the legislation that's coming in, there's still an allowance for exemptions to the procurement rules. So if we were in an urgency situation or a civil contingency situation, clearly we just need to act to protect our residents. So there would be scenarios where we might be using someone we've used before, but clearly the expectation is that wherever possible we comply with the legislation, otherwise we'd be held to account on it.
Yeah. Marina. Sorry, Marina,
yes.
Did you want to come in?
Yes, I just wanted to say it's a very good point about poor performance, and as Marcia said, the new Act will make provision for councils to report poor performance, bad behaviour. But within the process itself, there's also the facility for the council to ask clarification questions of contractors that tender. So if we have had a previous bad experience with a contractor, then we could use that process to ask questions and satisfy ourselves as to whether the reasons they give are acceptable or not. So that would be a way of being able to winnow out the poorer performers.
Thank you. Councillor Littlewood.
Thank you, Chair. Just looking at 7.2, second part of conclusions and reasons for recommendations, and I'm looking at the final part, which describes the fact that the full statutory guidance has not been issued as yet, and therefore further changes may be required. And the actual clause of 7.2 is asking for support that the monitoring officer is given delegated authority, which I've no problems with. But my question is, does the monitoring officer envisage any point at which any such changes will be brought back to the council in the form of this committee or overview and scrutiny?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the question. Absolutely. If the change was one that was not minor or was not a necessity by law, they would be brought back here. And case in point is the first report that I brought to you today, which is for your approval as members.
Thank you. Councillor Wally-Hawkins.
Yes, forgive me, but I can't find this here, and that could be just an oversight. So we've talked about, you know, we'll hold them to account if the contracts previously that they've held with us have not perhaps been as good as we wanted them to be. Can you describe, please, within this tendering process, I don't know what it's called, but do we ask for references if they've worked for another authority or another council somewhere, and how robust are we with that? Thank you.
Please. Oh, Marina, did you want to come in on that?
Yes, I would just say that it's absolutely standard procedure that we ask for references from previous clients or customers of tenderers. So that's an absolutely standard thing that happens with all procurements. Depending on the nature of the procurement, clearly, I mean, some things, sort of simple supply contracts, probably wouldn't lend themselves to that, but most other contracts would.
Thank you. Marcia, did you want to come in? No, thank you. Any further questions, councillors? Okay, so can we go to the recommendation, please, that the report's noted, that's subject to recommendation 3, the new contract standing orders at Appendix 1 are adopted with effect from the 24th of February 2025, and the Constitution amended accordingly. And 3, that the monitoring officer be given delegated authority to make changes to the new contract standing orders to reflect any additional or revised statutory guidance published prior to the 24th of February 2025. Do I have a proposer, please? Councillor Littlewood, and a seconder? Councillor Ostrander. All those in favour? Thank you. That's unanimous. Thank you. That's a recommend to council. Thank you very much. Let us move on to item 7, which is page 163 of your agenda. And this is proposal to approve the proposed amendments to the use of social media in investigations procedure document. And the recommendation is to approve the proposed amendments to the use of social media in investigations procedure document. I hand over to Marcia. Again.
Thank you, Chair. Members may recall at the last meeting, we brought the RIPA procedure and policy document to you. And I believe we explained at that stage that we would be the subject of a review by the Commission who deal with RIPA and surveillance and how it should be done properly. That inspector came out, and whilst we passed, which is great news, made some recommendations about certain things that we need to make amendments to in relation to our social media policy in relation to investigations. And so what you see here are those amendments that the inspector has asked that we make. Appendix 1 is the track change one, and Appendix 2 is the clean copy.
Thank you, councillors. Councillors, any comments, please? Okay. Well, if that's okay then, the recommendation is to approve the proposed amendments to the use of social media in investigations procedure document. Do I have a proposer, please? Councillor Wally-Hawkins, seconder. Councillor Hencher-Seraphin. All those in favour? Thank you, that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 8, which is the proposed amendment to the social media policy, members only. A proposal to approve the proposed amendment to social media policy, members. The recommendation is to approve the proposed amendments to social media policy, which is Appendix 1. Appendix 2 is your clean copy. I'll hand over to Marcia again.
Thank you, Chair. So in this report, there's a reference to two policies. As you're probably aware, there's a members policy and a policy for staff or officers. But the only amendment is as regards the members policy. And in terms of the members' policy, there's only a very slight amendment which you can see for yourselves, which is on page 199, as I understand it, at 3.6. In terms of the reason for why we've included the staff or officers' social media policy, that's because, in fact, you are audit and standards, you are and should be seized of the governance arrangements around all of these policies. And my records on a close review recently with the very helpful Democratic Services is that there hadn't been a more recent review of the documents back before audit and standards. So in the just over a year that I've been here, we've arranged for that to happen now. So hence why both documents are before you. Thank you, Chair.
Councillors, any questions? I have a question. I do go on social media, and sometimes they're on my personal account. There is a question asked of me, or something is raised that is clearly I know the answer to as a councillor. If it's very personal, I will personally message that person. If it's not, I will simply say, you need to contact such and such, or you need to, or this is such and such. This is kind of almost saying that you can't do that. Is that right? I mean, how else do we pick up issues that might pertain to our own wards without using that element of personal social media?
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully I'm reading it correctly as I look at it currently. Page 198, it talks about para 2, the personal use of social media. And it does say there, as I've read it, there is permitted use for all sorts of reasons on the network, etc., etc. At para 3, it then goes into what is prohibited use and then singles out the prohibited use aspect, which is why in that context it then speaks to you mustn't use it in those circumstances. But if that's not clear enough, then I'm more than happy to add some additional words if you would prefer.
Councillors, what do you think? Because I'm sure we've all been, those that are on social media, Facebook, I mean, I will often pick up casework because somebody has said, you know, I mean, particularly with county, you know, this road is closed, da, da, da. And I will go back to them with an answer if I know the answer. So I'd quite like to know your thoughts. Councillor Littlewood.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, but the first question that occurs to me is what is considered to be council business and what is political business? Because at the end of the day, as a ward member, yes, but I'm a member privately of many village notice boards, yep. And I get lots of questions that way. Now, is that personal or is that private? I'm going to end up with several phones if I'm not careful. Not private, political, as it were, or council business. So I think really we need a clear definition of what we're talking about here, just because the worlds overlap very greatly, and I think that's what you were saying earlier, Chair. I agree with you. I
think I am saying that. Councillor Hench-Serafin, you wanted to say something? Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have a councillor Facebook page. All I can say is I share information. Now, it could be about mental health, it could be about bees, it could be anything like that, and I share it to several groups, and that's appreciated. I don't really get a lot of social media contact. I have one occasionally of a bit of disrespectful comments. But mainly people get in touch with me either by phone or by email. So I don't really have too much on that score.
Thank you. Councillor Keithley.
Thanks, Chair. Just to say I can understand why you've introduced 3.6, so I think it's good. I kind of understand this. I don't use social media myself because I've been subject to defamatory comments against me in the past. on those sorts of channels. What I was going to say is I think it'd be really useful, once we've agreed this policy, assuming that we do, to run some training for members, because there's some really good practice, do's and don'ts, and it's constantly evolving this. It's sort of taking over lives. So I think it would be useful to do that.
I also think, so there's very often a circumstance, rather, that somebody will put on, oh, this road is closed, why is it closed? You know, it was open yesterday and nobody told us about it. And if I've been informed that very day by county that the road is closed because of an emergency, I will go back and tell that person why it's closed. But it's been told to me by an officer at the county council. Surely that's allowed.
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking at the policy as it currently reads, and I've already explained that if we can tighten the wording, we're more than happy to do so, well, hence the discussion we're having now. But at 1.2 of that policy, at 198, it does say it applies to use of social media. I haven't read all of it, but the second sentence does say it applies to the use of social media whenever you are acting in the capacity of a councillor, as well as personal use in your private capacity that may affect the council in any way. That's when the policy applies. But then para 2 does make it clear that you can use it, if that makes sense. So it's not saying you can't use it. It's just when we get to para 3, it's been very specific about what's prohibited use. And it's at para 3 where they're saying you mustn't, where it's prohibited, you absolutely mustn't use it in this particular way, which is why it's added. However, just thinking about some of the things that have been said just now, I wondered whether the following wording or something along this line might also help under 3.6 or just before. It's recognised that councillors will from time to time wish to notify residents of or share published public information from the council, which is allowed, something along those lines. Obviously, that wouldn't be the wording, the final wording, but just hearing some of the feedback now, an additional line to that effect would recognise some of the example you've given today.
Councillor Wally-Hoggins.
Yeah, I think this is really important that we drill down to this, because I know that various agents from all parties are actually looking at this, and the advice that we're getting, it's not rocket science, is that we should have 2 separate social media accounts, one as a councillor and one as a personal. However, I do think there needs to be a little consideration given that there has to be a reasonableness to this. So, for example, we're in a situation with inclement weather at the moment. If we become aware that there is a road closure or there's a severe weather warning, then I think it is entirely reasonable to save time, to advise people as rapidly as we can in order to do that. And I think that we should have some sort of a clause within that. But I think maybe we could be getting not too tangled up, but a little bit tangled up when actually what we're looking at here really is we're protecting ourselves under item 3, the prohibited use, the reasons why we have to be careful about what we're posting. And I think that this is an important moving forward as we move into yet another political campaign, that this is adhered to. And I think I actually welcome this. I think it's going to have a galvanising effect. I'm sitting next to Councillor Ian Shenton, who has both a private and a personal account, and he does it very well. And I think that this is something that we can go back with, and it gives us the, I suppose it gives us the impetus to do this. Yes, it is tricky doing that, but I do think we need a little paragraph here of, in an emergency situation, you know, there's got to be some reasonableness. Good Lord, we had COVID, all right, so we do need to get that. I also think that as private individuals and as councillors, we probably all follow Stratford District Council, and I don't think it's unreasonable to, if we're following that account, on our personal accounts, to share the information that Stratford District Council is putting out as any other individual would do. I think that is reasonable. We can't say, look at this, we're not terribly happy about this, but we can just share it for information. Do you see what I mean? And I think we need to make provision for an emergency situation. Thank you.
Marcia.
Yes, that would make perfect sense. And it probably, I've made a note of some of the points that you've all referenced as members. Proportionality in certain scenarios, or training, I've also made a note of that, but also recognising that there will be urgent scenarios where you'll want to share information with your residents, our residents, as soon as possible, especially where it's already published information from the council. Yeah.
Before I bring Councillor Ostrander in, Sarah, Councillor Wally-Hoggins brings in a very important point, which is I am on the Stratford district page, and some good information comes out that I want my residents to know about, and I share that on my pages. I, like Councillor Shenton, I have my own councillor page, but sometimes when things happen, people tag me as Kate Rolfe rather than Councillor Kate Rolfe, and I'm not going to go back to them and say, please, can you contact? I'm just going to answer it if I know the answer. If I don't know the answer, I'm not going to answer. But I think it's actually part of our job as councillors to go back to our residents with an answer if we know the answer. Councillor Ostrander. Is yours a follow-up to that?
Yes, I think it might be. Is that
That's fine. And then
it's really another question to do with this prohibited use, and that is, how are we going to, we've talked about it in a previous item, how are we going to police this, you know, and what are the consequences of prohibitively using it?
Good point, Marcia.
Is that a reasonable point, a follow-on point to make, Chair? Thank you.
I think so. Yeah.
Yes, so it only alludes very briefly to it in this policy, but it's the members' code of conduct. So that would be, if you like, the measure of management around that, because it would only come to light because there must be something about freedom to go about your daily business as members day to day. So clearly it would only come about if there was some sort of complaint under the member code of conduct, where it would then be managed in the normal way.
Thank you. Councillor Ostrander.
As well. I also have two accounts. Yeah, it can get very confusing, all of this. But I think we also need to link this into 3.5. We're often asked to pass on information from Stratford District Council that includes, for example, the logo. And 3.5 suggests that we shouldn't be using the logo in those as well. So it's just, I think all of this needs clarification.
Thank you, Councillor. Just going back to, and I know I've probably said it a bit like a record now, paragraph 3 is talking about prohibited use. So if you look at the first part of the sentence, again, you can all read, so I won't insult you, but it does say, don't do anything to jeopardise the council's confidential information and intellectual property. And then in that regard, please do not include the council's logos, etc. So that's the context it's meant to be in, but we can make that clearer.
Yeah, Councillor Shenton.
My apologies, first of all, for being late. And I've come in part way through, so I may be covering another area. But considering, in my case, I've got two accounts. Okay, that's fair enough. If we used our personal account and said something within that personal account, and then there was a freedom of information request, do we find ourselves is it the case that all our social media accounts would then come under scrutiny under that freedom of information request? Do we move into a bit of a grey area here?
Good point, Marcia.
Hopefully you've not already covered that.
No, it's a good point.
Thank you, Councillor, and it is a good question to ask. What I'd say is it depends on the nature of the circumstances and the conversation. If, for instance, what was on your personal media account was simply something that we'd already published on Stratford District Council's website and was already out there, then, strictly speaking, it's already out there and we're not breaching any rules around any data protection because it's already out there. But there might also be exemptions that could apply in that scenario as well. So if you were dealing with a resident and what you were talking about was sensitive or personal, or I'm going to say included a lot of third-party information, it would not be disclosable anyway, it would be exempt. So it really depends on the facts as they turned out in the scenario.
Please do.
I think what my concern, you see, is that if you like, we get a freedom of information request. We know that if we say used a personal computer and you're using your personal computer to answer an email, and even if it's personal, if a freedom of information request came in, you would have to hand that personal computer over for scrutiny, wouldn't you? So in which case you can see where I'm going with this. I'm slightly nervous of the Freedom of Information Act here.
Please do.
Okay. If we took this to its nth degree, we'd be saying any correspondence you have now might be the subject of FOI or data protection, whether or not it's in respect of this policy or sitting outside of the policy. Where we start from is what would be the scenario that you find yourself in at that time, and then it would be reviewed in that context. I can't give you anything more specific than that, because obviously it will turn on its own facts. The reality is, though, that if the information is, and I'm using the example already, but if it's already published anyway, and it's out there, the FOI wouldn't then extend to your personal data. Does that make sense? I don't want to get into the weeds because that's not what we're about today, and perhaps it's worthy of a conversation offline, but it really does turn on the facts. And I think it'd be wrong of me to start giving specifics when I don't know all the facts.
It's interesting because you're a fellow county councillor, and when I have a scenario like recently, a road has a timeline on it when it's going to pathway done and the trees done, and I get that information from county, I go immediately back and say, can I put this out on social media? And I have it in writing that I can, providing they say I can. Sometimes they say no because we just don't know the answer quite yet, but if I can, and I will, and I make sure I keep a note of that I have been given permission to put it. I think that just covers you really. And it also, I also say this is what has been told to me, so it covers me as well, because often residents come back 3 months later and say, Kate, the road still isn't finished, and you said it would be finished in July. And that often happens at county. But so it just covers me as well. This is what I have been told. I don't know how, that's how I use it. Marcia.
I was just going to add, Chair, that these scenarios that you're raising very real concerns about do need a discussion, but I just wonder whether now is the time against the policy that we're looking at and what we're seeking recommendations on. If it is that you want us to add a line that says that there is every likelihood that, information governance principles might apply, then we can do that. But as to the specific scenarios on which you have concerns, it might be that needs to happen offline.
Councillor Shenton.
I think personally I only give those examples, but literally for example. But I do think we need to make sure, not so much maybe for the people that are present here today, but for those that aren't present in this room and for future councillors, that there is always this possibility that if you use a private account, you will be subject to possibly to information governance coming to you and saying, we need to see this. I think it's belt and braces, maybe overkill. Just like I just hear about in other instances where people have used personal accounts and it has come back to bite them. And I just think we should have a one-liner in there maybe, but which just spells that out.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Marcia.
Chair.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a good suggestion, and we'll add it.
So, councillors, do we want to add a line now, or do we want to take it offline?
Chair, given some of the suggestions for amendments, and I've made about 4 or 5 down here about adding something about proportionality, training, information governance, being able to forward on information that's from the council. I think perhaps to word it first and perhaps to send it to you afterwards just for your thoughts would be the most appropriate thing in the circumstances.
Councillor Keithley.
Yeah, thanks. Just in respect to whether or not we do something today, actually agree on this or not, I wondered if in 4.1, Marcia, you could just, on page 199, whether or not that is completely clear in itself. Guidelines, you must make it clear in social media postings or in your profile whenever you are speaking on your own behalf or in your capacity as an elected representative. Is that what that should read?
It is what it should read because that's what the policy said before, which is why we brought it back to you as it is. But if it is that you wanted to consider an amendment, then of course that's what we're here to do.
I'm just suggesting then that ought to be amended with the word "or" in it.
Sorry, could
that's
you
missing,
just
isn't
repeat that wording again?
I'm just reading 4.1, Chair. Yeah. It seems to me there's just an OR missing. You've got to make it clear when you're in social media and you're posting or in your profile whether or not you're speaking on your own personal behalf or whether or not you're speaking in your capacity as an elected representative. So the word "or" is missing in 4.1. I'd just make that as an observation for an amendment.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Councillor Wally-Hoggins.
Yeah, I think that I think I'm right in thinking that if you're using a councillor profile, that you will need the tag that we all have to have on our political literature, you know, promoted by. That needs to be robustly on there so that is clear and present at all times, and that covers you for when you're making a councillor bit. And I actually think that this is probably a really good bit of legislation or a document going through here, because I think it really will have a galvanising effect on perhaps some of us that have been just hoping for the best, to be honest. So I thank you for this, because I will be, but it is up to our agents in order to make that imprint, it's called an imprint, to put that imprint on your councillor sites. There can be no confusion for anybody. Thank you.
So, Marcia, are you going to come back with something that we can look at, or are you happy with Councillor Keithley's suggestion, just putting in the "or"? Because I must admit that does make it a lot clearer, 4.1.
Thanks, Chair. So what I've done is listen to all the suggested amendments, and would want to obviously make those amendments, send them to you as Chair in the first instance to make sure that I have them collated correctly, and then make the updates into the policy.
Brilliant. Councillor Shenton.
I think that's the best course of action myself, that Marcia puts the words together, not us, and we make sure, then at least we know we're on safe ground.
and councillors, are we happy to agree that by email, or do we want to wait till the next meeting? Are we happy to agree it by email? Or would you like it to come back to the next meeting? It's entirely up to you. Councillor Wally-Hoggins.
I think this is really important, actually, and I think an email round the robin is just a little bit perfunctory, really, and I think we'd be much better off, if you don't mind me, I rarely suggest this, if we had an exceptional meeting to discuss this, because this is really important.
Or can it come back to the next meeting?
Which is when, sorry?
It's when? 18th of November. Is that okay?
Let's do that, 18th of November then, thank you. Yeah.
So, does that mean we do not have to go to the recommendation on this?
So the recommendation as is, all we're agreeing is that in terms of we're noting the officer policy.
Yeah.
And the
The members' policy we will bring back to the meeting in November. Everybody happy with that?
For the amendments to be...
For the amendments to be agreed. So, so the recommendation is to improve the council policy, but the members' policy we will bring back on the 18th of November with amendments. Meanwhile, you will send out your thoughts on the amendments anyway, and that we'll debate those amendments at the next meeting. Is that agreed, councillors? Councillor Littlewood.
Thank you. Very last moment, I was letting the conversations and debates go. As part of that, at the moment, the council provides a preferred text for the signatures on emails. Could the it does do that. I mean, we get a message saying this is what we want to see, the form of signature, the form of words for the signature. With regards to the imprint on any social media, any recommendations on that I think would be appreciated. I understand the point that Councillor Wally-Hoggins made with regards to data on imprint, but let's make sure that we get this right for social media too if we're using it in the council capacity.
Thank you, Marcia.
I've made a note, but in terms of imprint, it may be that we want to keep the policy fluid and flexible and not too prescriptive as well. I'll probably just add that as well, but I have made a note of the request.
Thank you. So back to the recommendation that I said earlier. Can I have a proposer and a seconder, please? Proposed it, Councillor Shenton, seconder, Councillor Wally-Hoggins. Thank you. All those in favour? Thank you, that's unanimous. Thank you, that was an interesting debate. Let us now move on to item 9, which is CCTV Code of Practice. This is a report on the Stratford-on-Avon CCTV Code of Practice and the actions taken to ensure it remains effective. The recommendation is to note and approve the CCTV Code of Practice document and actions taken to ensure it remains effective. I'm going to hand straight over to Sam Slemenzek, if that's okay. Thank you very much, Sam.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, committee members, just for allowing me the opportunity to present this report today. So a lot of the detail is obviously in the report and the associated appendices, and this report effectively charts how the District Council retains its British standard, which demonstrates standards for the CCTV service that we run, specifically around how we manage privacy for residents as a part of the scheme, data protection aspects, as well as legislative compliance, how the scheme is accountable to the public, and other kind of more specific matters around, say, for example, disclosure. So those specific kind of policies are documented within the appendices. So the CCTV service itself, just as a little bit of a reminder, is a 24/7 CCTV control room operated by Stratford-on-Avon District Council, but working in really, really close partnership with our partners such as Warwickshire Police, with the primary aim of preventing and detecting crime and ultimately apprehending offenders. So we play a really vital role in responding to emergencies and incidents, as well as actually providing evidential packages to the police, which can be utilised in prosecutions or in other resolutions to crime or antisocial behaviour. And similarly, we play a really vital role in terms of civil contingencies and other emergencies as well for other emergency services. So that's a particular role that the service undertakes, and you might have seen actually just last week, one of the things that the service is really trying to do is actually expose the amount of good work that is taking place. So last week we released a press release about within the last year period, we had 91 drink drivers who actually the service were able to apprehend and assist Warwickshire Police in prosecuting. This scheme itself is supported by parish councils as well, so a financial contribution from parish councils whereby the CCTV is in place in local areas as well. So it's a real partnership approach, and it helps the council to fulfil its legal duties under the Crime and Disorder Act in attempting to prevent crime and disorder in its local area. So in terms of the accreditation that I mentioned earlier, the British Standard, we actually employ an independent CCTV consultant who's nationally recognised to help us prepare an evaluation report which looks at the entire scheme and looks at those standards that I explained earlier. That evaluation is written up. We produce what's called a code of practice, which once again governs how the operators and the scheme works. And then we're independently audited by inspectors from the British Standard, the Surveillance Camera Commissioner, at a given time within the year. So actually within this past year, I believe it was the 7th of June this year, we had our independent audit, which is a 120-point audit of the scheme for which we passed, and there were no non-conformities for that. These documents that you see in both appendices are publicly available and on our website, with the aim of obviously providing transparency around how that scheme works, both for members of the public and businesses alike. So effectively that's the report in summary, but happy to take any questions, Chair, and thank you.
I can't believe there won't be any. Councillor Shenton.
Thank you, Chair. Just a very quick one. Quite obviously quite detailed. The first thing I look at, I think, this is the policy that we had this policy last year. It's not brand new, is it?
So basically every year, the code of practice and the evaluation is revamped every single year. It does follow a particular standard template, should we say, but there are aspects of it that change depending on changes within the scheme.
Okay, so you've neatly brought me to what my question. Looking at this, what has changed since last year? What key items have changed? What updates have there been to this policy? Because
sorry, Councillor Shenton, can you talk into the microphone?
Oh, sorry,
we're
my
not picking
apologies.
it up.
Yeah.
Sorry, could you say that again?
I'm usually the first one to complain when people don't do it because I'm listening from home. My apologies. Yeah, so I'm sort of interested in whether you can point us to the key changes since the last time this policy came to this committee or to a committee. Just those key changes, because there are, looking at this, you would think nothing has changed. This is last year, same as last year, and we've just signed it off. So if you can give us some key pointers, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. And I think that's a really good question, because actually if you look at over a number of years, particularly the code of practice, because we're having to meet legislative requirements, that a lot of those sections will be very similar. So actually, in terms of the code of practice itself, which is how we operate, there's only a number of minor changes really when we look at it this year. So actually it might be camera specific changes where we actually chart the fact that there might be different cameras in specific locations. So say for example the scheme this year has added what we call Safer Streets cameras through Home Office funding on the recreation ground in Stratford. So within that kind of code of practice, we reference some of those new assets that we might have, and if there are kind of privacy mitigation specific to those locations, potentially. So sometimes changes to the scheme like that would be documented within that. But aside from that, because we've not had any specific legislative change, which sometimes we do, that would particularly chart within that. So really it's only a lot of those assets which have sometimes changed that, you know, we've probably found for this specific year. If, and sorry, just further point of clarity, that's the code of practice. If we're looking at the evaluation, year on year, you've got a list of different statistics that relate to crime and disorder, and obviously relative performance. So in terms of the code of practice, you won't see any significant changes unless there's legislative or policy change amongst the standard. But on that evaluation report, there is different, usually figures every year.
Just very quickly as well, did I hear correctly that the audit, you passed through the audit this year? And I have to say, put on record then from us that congratulations, that's well done, obviously, because of the legislative hooks and jumps, hurdles that you have to go through. I think that's very good, so well done.
Councillor Wally-Hoggins.
Yeah, I'm looking at, pages 276, 277, which is to do with the type of offences that are recorded. I thought we had some cameras in Shipston-on-Stour. and I don't see any reference to those on these papers unless I've missed them. Thank you. That's the page of the full set of papers, that's 276. If you're just looking at your papers, this is page 16 and 17.
Apologies, Councillor, I'm just scrolling
Sorry, it's fine.
madly just to get to it. Oh, that's very kind. The Councillor's actually offered me a paper version to have a look at.
Yeah, it's different to what we've got here. Sorry.
Yeah, I'd have to have a look just to make sure that that version is correct. But the you are correct. We do have cameras in Shipston, and I think more latterly there is a data split for the performance relative to the CCTV performance later in the report. But I think on, as you're saying, 278 and the kind of 277, those pages there where you've got the more general figures about crime disorder in those areas, it doesn't appear that Shipston is amongst those tables. So I'll have to check that that version is obviously correct, Councillor.
Oh, just the question is then, I mean, if there has been an inadvertent omission, if we could have updated information for Shipston to replicate where these are, because it's quite a big investment in Shipston. Is that all right? Thank you.
Of course, Councillor. And just for reassurance, so these kind of key indicators, they do include Shipston amongst it, but I think that table breakdown, potentially it could be that Shipston is missing off that. So I'll re-verify that.
I think the table breakdown for Shipston would be really useful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Councillor Shenton.
Councillor Willie Hoggins has raised an interesting one, because I can't see Tamworth-in-Arden on here either, but I may be wrong. And bearing in mind the problems that we have over at Earlswood with antisocial behaviour.
Did you say Henley?
Tamworth-in-Arden.
Oh,
Sorry, I'll move this.
Yeah, sorry.
I'll start that again. I'll get the hang of this, you know, after all these years, you know. Yeah, so I may be wrong, but I'm skimming through this. I'm struggling to see anything to do with Earlswood and reference, especially as we've got a camera. We know we've got a camera there. We have antisocial behaviour issues there and a public space protection order in place. I'm not saying it's not there. I just can't see it, you know. So I'd be interested in knowing a bit more about that, because, as you know, it is a red hot potato, this one, and it came up at the parish council meeting again last week, and I know that Manuela Pertogether, our MP, is also involved in this issue, because I spoke to her at last week's meeting here. So I am interested in a bit more detail about that as well.
Yeah, absolutely, Councillor. And in a very similar point to previous, just looking at the table breakdown, because I think with Tamworth they're more recently introduced. I think it's just that the table from the recorded crime statistics is omitted in this particular section. On page 289, you can see that the actual figures that relate to CCTV do record Earlswood. So we have got the CCTV statistics of the team, obviously the work of the team within Tamworth-in-Arden, but it's just that section that precedes it where it's talking about crime statistics. But once again, that's something that I'll look at as per the previous point.
Thank you. Councillor Ostrander.
Hi, thank you for this really comprehensive report. I've just got a query that relates to the conclusions and the assessments. So I'm looking at page 283 and 285. And I don't know if you're being overly cautious, being careful what you conclude, but on page 283 you say, without a more detailed analysis, it's difficult to establish if the CCTV has had positive effect. It'll be necessary to monitor and evaluate the system over the next 12 months. And then on page 285, you say, whilst it's not possible to make an assumption that the CCTV system is actually preventing offences, it's a component part of the preventative package. I suspect you're just being cautious in your wording about being able to draw conclusions about the effects of these cameras, but I'm just thinking that we spend a lot of money on this very sophisticated system. We just had a press release, as you mentioned, about the 91 drink drivers. Is there not some data that we could collect, or a way that we could use the data to be a little more substantive in what we're saying there? I just wonder if we're being a little too modest, maybe. Your thinking about that would just help me a little. I'm surprised that you've written those things.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. It is a great question. Just for clarity, so this report isn't actually written by Stratford District Council. This is written by our independent consultant who carries out the evaluation for us. So those conclusions are concluded by that consultant. I think there's an interesting point to almost differentiate a little bit around the effectiveness of the scheme, which is that we talk about prevention of crime, we talk about detection of crime, and then apprehending people. So actually, when it comes to CCTV, it's quite easy for us to look at a particular crime and disorder matter in a particular town, look at the impact of CCTV in terms of capturing offending, the subsequent impact, and obviously how that kind of prevails through the criminal justice system. The real challenge for us is actually trying to understand the preventative angle of CCTV. So actually, when we put a set of cameras or a particular camera in a location, actually, sometimes is the very presence of that camera and the understanding by residents enough to actually put that behaviour off, allow it to perhaps transgress somewhere else, or actually where we've got a scheme of multiple cameras, pick up that behaviour in other locations. So the preventative angle is really quite challenging sometimes. And without going into too much detail, because I could probably talk on this quite a bit, we work quite a lot with multi-agency partners, so our own ASB team, so you don't always get police-led interventions, say for example. So actually our team will sometimes, if something is captured on CCTV, they might be able to do some work with, let's just say, youth justice about antisocial behaviour involving young people. We might be able to engage in a much more informal space, which might ultimately prevent future offending of that group because we're able to intervene more early. So the difficulty for us is actually how do we chart the prevention of crime through CCTV, because sometimes we can deal with these things through one incident but prevent 10 offences, let's just say. So actually there is a bigger piece of work that we need to do, which is to chart how both the presence of cameras but also the intervention of cameras and what we do with the use of that evidence could potentially prevent that. And that's going to be a mixture of qualitative work, sort of case study work, and potentially could be quite challenging, and it's a national issue when it comes to managing the effectiveness of CCTV. So I appreciate what you're saying. It's kind of, as a statement, it's something that we could explore all day, but it is something genuinely I think we want to understand more of.
Lovely. Can I ask a follow-up?
Of course, yes.
So are there plans afoot to do that sort of follow-up work? Because that sounds expensive too. Qualitative analysis is expensive. So, so are there plans to do that sort of follow-up work, and has that been sort of costed out and cost-effective for the taxpayer, etc.?
Yeah. So we're not looking at a specific project that has specific costs, but actually we're working really closely with the Warwickshire Insight team, who provide sort of analysis for the Community Safety Partnership in South Warwickshire, and without going into too much detail, they're going to be conducting what's called a strategic needs assessment for the next 5-year period to look at the priorities for us in Stratford and Warwick. Now, as a result of that, they've started collecting data on CCTV specifically, and actually they're able to chart in relation to ASB but also other criminal offences kind of the impact that's being had. So that's a piece of work that is holistic and it's ongoing, and actually once we get more data we'll hopefully build a more comprehensive picture. So it's not part of a kind of a one-off, we're just looking at CCTV effectiveness. It's part of a wider piece of work that's going on about crime in ASB within Warwickshire. So hopefully we'll get some really useful data off that will actually allow us to look at this as well.
Yeah, and perhaps say something a bit more positive. Yeah, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wally-Hoggins, could you turn your microphone off, please, Councillor?
I think it's easy to make the mistake of thinking that that we need to know how many crimes the cameras have recorded. But what we need to imagine is a world without CCTV cameras and see it as a preventative. We can't always quantify. That's almost an impossibility. but that to me is really crucial. And also we're looking at the key indicators on page 275, which is page 15 of the document that we've got in front of us. And the key indicators there look at the recorded crime and the annual change. I mean, you look at that and you would automatically assume that that is because of CCTV cameras. That's not necessarily the case. We must remember that some people are not recording crimes anymore. They're not reporting them, and I think that is something that we need to be very careful of, because you can't say that the CCTV cameras have caused that reduction there. It's more of an observation, really, but it is. Do you see the CCTV station, if you like, the control room being less busy as a result of this reduction in crime, Sam, or would you say it was as busy as it ever was? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. And yeah, it's a really, really good point. And to be honest, the discussion about the context of crime recording, it's deeply fascinating, but incredibly complex to unpick, isn't it? Absolutely. What you'll probably see from our statistics is actually when we look at CCTV, this past year has actually been the busiest in terms of outright incidents. So we've had an 80% increase in the work that the team have done. So actually, even though sometimes you can chart general decreases in recorded crime, because our CCTV is a proactive service and we also deal with other civil contingencies, things like missing people actually is quite a big part of the work that we do. That's reflected in our general demand. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It's interesting though, because these data sets that we've got are different from recorded stats, so we can't always compare and contrast, but I think it's a useful picture overall to kind of see them.
Thank you. Councillor Shenton.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Just coming back to Earlswood, and I'm sorry to labour this point. Earlswood is as we know, has suffered lots of antisocial behaviour. So if I look on page 289, according to this, there are no incidents of antisocial behaviour in Earlswood. So my question is, what is this showing, this incident? Is it a recorded incident with the police? Or is it something else? Because, I mean, if I look at the local log, as you have, we can see there is lots of antisocial behaviour, and the police acknowledge themselves there is antisocial behaviour problem. I think my concern is that this document is in the public domain, and it sort of says there's not a problem in Earlswood.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. And I think it's a good point to try and provide a little bit of clarity here, because when we look at the sort of offence types or issue types that are on that left-hand column, ultimately you've got things that are either criminal offences, there might be other types of concerns, say for example alarm activations, concern for welfare. So actually, when you look at the alignment between, say for example, the police recording, our recording and other emergency services recording, there can be differences. So actually CCTV in and of itself, we can only see things, we can't hear things, we don't get direct reports from the police, we only get reports from Warwickshire Police or other businesses through a retail radio scheme. So actually, if you were to play out a particular incident, let's just say in Earlswood, that was to happen where we've got our particular camera, it might be that we see something playing out that involves a car, and actually we see a certain aspect to an incident, but then that incident continues on, let's just say up the road, out of camera shot, or something is heard, let's just say in the street. What we would initially record as an offence, which might be a concern for welfare, a suspicious incident, or perhaps a drugs-related incident, when subsequently investigated by the police and followed up, there's obviously a time duration of, perhaps when officers have caught up with those individuals, when they've been able to carry out an investigation that might find that actually that initial incident that we've seen as this is actually recorded as a different type of offence more latterly, let's just say. So we might record, let's just say, a suspicious incident of which there's a couple there for Earlswood, but actually the police might catch up with them, and that might turn out to be a drugs-related incident when somebody stop and search, let's just say. So we've got to be cautious that obviously whilst this does align itself on the whole to what the incidents usually turn out to be investigated and corroborated as, there is a degree to which obviously initial recording of incidents by our operators doesn't always pertain to be what ultimately the investigation from, say, for example, Warwickshire Police would result in, if that makes sense.
Please do.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose the next part of the question is, we hear sometimes about offences being recorded more than once. They've got different aspects of the same offence. Do these statistics, are they clean in the respect of it can only have one mark? It can be burglary, or it could be drugs, or theft, or whatever. Or could it be recorded in 2 or 3 different areas?
Yeah, that's a great question. We can put multiple types to incidents once they're recorded, but by and large we categorise one, let's just say, event as a particular incident type, and then we would break down within kind of a free text box. We have the ability to then categorise them separately, but on the whole, no, we wouldn't have multiple different types of offences recorded under here.
Go on.
Sorry, Sam, just playing with words here. On the whole.
Yeah, so we would have the ability to create separate logs, but if we have one particular event play out on a camera, we would record it as, let's just say, a concern for welfare or something else. We do record the level of the detail of the incident type, which might include other aspects to it, but no, we record one event as one incident, effectively, so one type.
Thank you. Before I bring Councillor Littlewood in, I'd like to ask a question about Earlswood. So, according to that report on the chart on 289, page 29 of your report, there are 8 episodes of concern for welfare. There are 2 episodes of nuisance, which could be ASB. The welfare could be ASB. But more importantly, suspicion. What does that mean? There's 697 episodes of suspicion in Stratford. What suspicion? I know the meaning of the word, but what is it meaning to you? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So suspicion is effectively where we believe that somebody may be on the periphery of committing a criminal offence, or might be involved on the periphery of some sort of criminal activity, effectively.
Oh, okay.
But it cannot be confirmed at that material time that that is the case, and therefore we can't attribute it to a specific category of crime.
There were 6 in Earlswood. I'm just saying. I mean, and concern for welfare. That could be go alongside ASB, could it not? It's an interesting breakdown of words, in my opinion.
Yeah, and not specifically contained within this kind of public report, but we do have what's called an operator's procedures manual, which does specifically break down the sorts of categorisation that we have and actually how we record against that, in a similar way to you have crime recording standards where you have definitions of offences and how they align to particular types. So very similarly, concern for welfare, we've got almost like criteria or things that we would align to actually where an incident is a concern for welfare incident, say for example.
So I'm just going to go back. Sorry, Councillor Littlewood. I need to kind of get this in my head. So suspicion. Okay, so there were 697 episodes of suspicion. How did that correlate with? How did it go forward? Were there 697 further episodes that you, or were you just sitting there saying we suspect something might happen? How do we know whether it happened or not?
Yeah, that's a good question. So ultimately, it's where we've seen something, we're suspecting that at that initial point of actually seeing it or receiving some information, and it could even be that the police have asked us, they've called us and said, we've got a report from some residents, actually I've got, I don't know, let's just say a group of people behind the shed, let's just say in my back garden or just behind the fence, let's just say. We then spin the camera around, we have a look at it, we're able to see that there's 3 individuals there. Warwickshire Police come out, they speak to them, and actually there's a perfectly legitimate reason for them sometimes being there. It might be that we actually record subsequently that, you know, there's a potential suspicion there because we're able to either corroborate it from other sources. In some cases, we just use that as a category where ultimately a criminal offence hasn't taken place. If we know it has, then we'll record it in these incidents as appropriate. But ultimately, that category is that kind of where we suspect reasonably that somebody may or may not be potentially involved in some sort of attempt of offence, but it's not proved as such.
Thank you. Councillor Littlewood.
Thank you, Chair. I suspect what we're trying to do is to understand what the purpose of this report is and why we're talking about it and why it's so interesting. I mean, what we're really talking about is the difference between data and information. What we're trying to look at is this pack of data which has been partially analysed and trying to get information from that. And I don't think we have enough data just from the cameras. For example, I can draw a conclusion looking at the data here that is presented, is that Stratford-on-Avon is a terrible place to be because it's 80 to 90% of the incidents happen there. But then when you look at the population of cameras that you've got, it's hardly surprising because they're mostly there. So really and truthfully, it is insufficiently presented, if I may say so. And this isn't a criticism. This is a common problem with data and information that you can draw from it, to draw conclusions, to therefore think about what other actions should be taken. So what we're really missing here is the overall statistics from the police compared, so the number of incidents the police have got on their books compared to what you are looking at on the camera log. And so I caution members of this committee not to try and draw too much information from this because it's not sufficiently data rich.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. I do. Yeah, no, and I do appreciate that. I mean, there is a bit of an attempt in sort of pages 275 onwards where it talks a little bit more about the kind of statistics. So that's a bit of a breakdown per town area of particular kind of offence types. But as you say, perhaps there could be more information presented about specific categorisations, let's just say, around those specific towns, a bit more detailed analysis. So that's a useful point taken. Thank you.
Yeah, I think what the technical thing is data reduction and normalisation.
Councillors, have you all seen the control room where the CCTV? You have, right? I would like a visit. It's about 12 years since I had a visit. Who else would like to visit? Could you send? Is that possible, Sam? That some of us can go on a visit and see the control room, and if so, can that invitation be sent out with some dates? Because I would quite like to see it. And so that's Councillor Keithley, Councillor Shenton, Councillor Littlewood, Councillor Hencher-Servan. Well, look, and Trevor, let's all go on an outing with our hats and by our rock and our whistles and things. Councillor Shenton.
Who's bringing the beer?
Sorry?
Who's bringing the beer and the sandwiches?
Well, I mean, that can be arranged. But seriously, Councillor Keithley.
Well, only to say I haven't been, but I know that Councillor Gist had discussed the possibility of us visiting before, and I think there was an open invitation, actually, Sam, wasn't there? So it's just a question of picking that up.
Right. So, Sam, would you send out some dates? I think some of us would really appreciate a visit, if that's possible.
Yeah, absolutely, Chair. There's an open invitation to all SDC members, but also to the relevant parish councils as well, who provide contribution and their elected members to attend the CCTV control room. The location is confidential, so obviously in terms of that,
the problem with an open invitation, though, is people don't respond to that. If it's put in the diary at 3 o'clock Wednesday week, then people respond.
Yeah, absolutely. So we can disseminate something further on that.
That'd be lovely. Marcia.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to interject to say that, as was referenced by Councillor Keithley, I know that Councillor Gist, who is our portfolio holder, has been working very closely with Law and Governance, and that includes Sam, to try and make this happen. So I just wonder whether there ought to be some liaison involving Natalie as well to make these arrangements as the lead portfolio holder.
I suspect also that all of us can't get in that room in one go, so it would probably mean 2 or 3 sessions, but it would be very welcome. Thank you. Right, let's go back to the recommendation of item 9, to note and approve the CCTV Code of Practice document and actions taken to ensure it remains effective. Can I have a proposer, please? Councillor Ostrander, a seconder. Councillor Keithley, all those in favour? Thank you, that's unanimous. Councillors, does anyone need a comfort break now, or should we move on? Right, moving on. Okay, so item 10, which is, we're down to audit now. Item 10 is the internal audit progress report, and I'd like to hand over to Paul Clark to present the report. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Chair. So this report sets out the work of the internal audit team since the July meeting. There have been 2 audits where reports have been produced. That's the cash collection and cashiers, and the licensing one, which is a draft report stage at the moment. Both of those have come out with substantial assurance opinion, which is a good positive assurance outcome. We also have work in progress at the moment on corporate property, performance management and corporate governance. So overall, I'm satisfied with progress that we're making against the plan, and we're on track to deliver the work during the year. I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
May I start with a question, please, if that's possible? The waste contract direction of travel is going downwards. Can you put a little meat around the bones on that one, please?
Yeah, thank you. So that that piece of work was from the 23-24 year. It was one where the waste contract audit, when it was audited previously, was full assurance. This time it came out with substantial assurance. So it was still a good outcome in terms of that. There were some minor recommendations that were made, and we tracked the actions with management during the year to make sure that the controls are in place. But the fact that it still came out with substantial assurance, I would say, should give good comfort to the committee.
Well, I mean, the arrow's going downwards, so that concerns me. At what point do we get that middle arrow or the arrow going upwards? I mean, substantial assurance doesn't fill me. I mean, it does if the arrows are going up, but it doesn't fill me with a great deal of you know what I'm trying to say. So when are we going to get something back on this that's going to bring that arrow doing that or that?
Well, the next review of the waste contract will depend on what comes out in terms of putting together the audit plan for 25-26. So may well be included there if it's felt to be required. I think what I'd say, looking at how we go about an overall sort of planning process for what gets included in the plan, we would take account of what the assurance opinions have been in the past. So within the outcomes of the audit, there could be at the bottom end, limited assurance. Better than that is moderate assurance. Better than that is substantial assurance. And then the highest one would be full assurance. So although the waste contracts had a direction of travel lower, to me it wouldn't necessarily be in the highest category of risk to go into the audit plan, where we've got limited resources to cover everything. I'm happy if the committee would like it to be reviewed again to
yes.
put it into next year's plan.
What I'm understanding from what you're saying is that the substantial level of assurance is saying that in time you're happy that in time that arrow will be going upwards. Is that what you're saying?
No, the arrow just is a fact that since compared with the previous audit that was undertaken, the outcome of substantial is lower than the one on the previous audit. But the fact that it is substantial does mean that when we carried out the audit, we were generally satisfied that there was good control.
Okay. Richard, can I bring you in, please? Thank you.
If I could attempt to sort of clarify, I think what you're saying is it's compared from the previous audit, which could be 2-3 years ago, to the current audit, and so that direction of travel won't change until it's audited again. So it's not reviewed in between each of these committee meetings. That arrow will stay in that position. So as I read it, it was substantial previously, but slightly less in the substantial range.
Sorry, I still don't understand why the arrow will remain going downwards. So I'm going to bring Councillor Wally Hoggins in, followed by Councillor Shenton.
Yeah, basically, what I need to know is why is that arrow going down? That's all I want to know, is not the audit position, but why have we got a waste contract that is going in a downwards direction of travel? Because the waste contract has in fact been the subject of many discussions at various committees, and we need some assurances around that, really. So at the moment I'm feeling completely fogged by what I'm being told, and I just want to know why this direction of travel, why the arrow, specific reasons to do with the waste contract as to why we're in a downward direction of travel. Thank you. As I think that's the question on everybody's mind. Thank you.
Sorry to put you in the...
That's fine. So I've tried to explain why it's dropped down. If you want the specifics about the audit, I'm happy to bring to the next committee a bit more detail on that particular audit and explain why it was lower than the previous audit. I'm happy to bring that.
Forgive me, but this is a report that's come to us. Surely you know the reason the arrow's going down, and you don't have to come back to it. You've written the report, so...
Yeah.
I mean, do you know why the arrow is going down now, or are you saying that you'll come back to us at the next meeting and tell us?
I'd need to look back at the report.
Okay. Right. Well, let's go on to. So I've count. Oh, sorry.
It's just a follow-up statement, really. That there are many for all of us, there are many. We pay our council tax mainly on time, and for most people, really, they're paying the council tax to have their bins collected in Stratford district. That is it, and that is why the waste contract is actually more important to the majority of people in this district, and that's why we absolutely do need to know why the direction of travel is in a downward, because if there's something in place that we need to know, it's that important. You know, you pay your council tax to get your bins collected. For most people, that is why you pay it. Thank you so much. I will look forward to a much more detailed report, unless the portfolio holder is able to help us with that. No.
Paul, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the next three, because I think they'll all be on the same subject. I'm going to take the next three people to say something, straight after each other, and then perhaps I'll bring in Marcia and then you. So, Councillor Shenton, if you'd like to say what you need to say.
Thank you, Chair. I know we go through this at each meeting, but the one that, other than the waste contract, the other one that sort of grabs your attention is cyber risk, quite obviously, and that's a major issue. And that's already moderate, which is the next level down, obviously. And I realise with limited resources, etc., you can't sort of just in terms of cyber, well, in terms of the waste contract, just go and do a completely new audit straight away. That's just not feasible or practical. But in terms of cyber risk, which is a growing risk, and it's moderate already and going in the wrong direction, I'd be interested to know a little bit more about that as well. I think most of these reports, I'm looking at red items, things that are going in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
And so a little bit more detail would be useful, I suppose, for the committee, just so that we know what it is we're noting, understand the report itself. It's certainly not a criticism, because I know how busy you are, Paul, and the team, because we effectively buy in your services. You've got county and other areas, but things like cyber risk, growing issue for everyone. So I'd like a bit more detail on that, please.
Thank you. As I say, I'm going to just get the questions in. So, Councillor Keithley.
Thanks, Chair. I just observed that, in fact, whilst I can understand, Paul, why you would perhaps choose to use the arrows, because it was some sort of indicator to us, it's actually caused more confusion in actually putting them on there. And cyber risk is a good example, because, in fact, it's showing down to moderate from what would have been substantial last time, presumably, which would have been good, substantial. And in the case of the waste audit, last time you had full compliance, which would have been absolutely amazing to get full marks in an audit with no risks identified. This time round, something's changed in the audit, picked up a few issues, there's some actions and some things to sort out. So in fact, what I would say is that the direction of travel arrows have probably made it a bit more confusing. And in respect to the questions that have been asked by Councillor Wally Hoggins here, it would have been more helpful, in fact, to understand perhaps for some of these contracts what the higher risks were that had been identified by the audits, so that we would have seen them on this report rather than the arrows. Because frankly, I mean, the minute you've got full compliance with an audit and you have another audit, the only way it's likely to be sideways or downwards. Once you've got to full, you're really setting yourself up to be reporting. If anything's found, you're going to report a downward arrow, aren't you? So that's my comment on it.
Thank you. Councillor Littlewood.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the cyber security or cyber risks was the one that stood out very, very strongly to me. That is, I mean, one of the things we don't see here is the relative risk to this council, and I can't imagine anything more risky and more dangerous to this council than cyber breaches or even hacking, and it will cost millions and millions and millions. So I actually don't mind the direction of travel indicators. That's fine. That's a quick shorthand. But then I want to go to page whatever it is that you reference on that direction of travel and see the analysis and the facts. Because, quite frankly, we can't really understand much from these pictograms. I have to say, it's just too, well, almost trivial. And I don't mean to be insulting when I say that. It's just insufficient information to make comment or ask about. And clearly, you need to go back and have a look. But I would really welcome a substantial report on each of these items. Thank you.
I think we've come to the conclusion that we need further reports on the waste contract and cyber security, if that's okay. But Councillor Wally Hoggins.
Yeah, it's just an observation, really, because I know that the audit team do an awful lot of work to get to this point. However, I'm beginning to wonder if we actually need to reformat the report that we're getting, because it's not giving us the information that we require. I actually like the arrows. The other thing that I would point out is that we've got lots of stars here saying scheduled. I'd like to know, you know, as part of this, when they're actually scheduled to happen, for example. It just gives us more reassurance and more information of when it's going to be. So I'm actually questioning whether we need to look at the way that this report is formatted, but with the caveat as I love the arrows. Okay, so that's...
Okay. Councillor Shenton, briefly, you said?
It is very brief. I've got to say, being colourblind, the arrows are perfect because that gives me the direction to travel. Colours, red, amber, green, forget it. I struggle with that, and I pointed this out at county as well in committees, and we use more vivid. They tend to use more vivid colours. So arrows, yeah, keep them. But it's just that the whole thing of what's underlying, I think.
I'm going to bring Marcia in and then Paul to respond.
Thank you, Chair. My point is quite separate to the one that you've all been referencing. Mine's just a more general one, which was to do with the current reference to law and governance. So within law and governance, as you know, sits legal services, corporate governance, related matters, information governance, and community safety. And I can see on page 297 there's a reference to information governance being postponed, but I believe it's actually started, so I just wanted it recorded for your record that it's actually started, and one of your auditors has already contacted our information governance team to get that underway. So I just wanted that noted for the records. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, Paul, sorry to put you in the firing line. Thank you.
That's fine. Thank you. Just to go back to the last point first, the information governance is referenced on page 299. So on the current year's plan, it says it's in progress. It's the previous year's one which shows it was postponed. So that's why it's set out like that. Yeah, so, I mean, just in terms of the overall sort of format of the report, happy to look at that. I mean, we produce work for yourselves, for the county council, for 2 police clients, and all of the reports are actually different. So it's not a standard thing that we use, you know, this sort of arrows and that level of detail. We have been sort of guided over the years by what the committee like to see. So I'm happy to sort of look at that format and take on board the comments around the level of detail and the amount of information around the points that are being found. In relation to cyber, we feel it's a significant risk, and it was looked at last year, and as you see, it's there on the plan for this year as well. So there will be an update on that particular one, and I can bring more detail to the next committee on what the outcomes were from the last audit, but also about what the schedule is for the current year.
I think, sorry, I think what we're saying is that when we see those arrows going down, if there could be some explanation behind that in whenever there is a report coming forward, and certainly at the next meeting, if we can have some detail around the waste contract and the cyber risks, that would be very useful. I'm going to bring Councillor Ostrander in, and then David, I'll bring you in.
Thank you, Chair. Paul, can I just ask a question? I think that the data here for waste contract and cybersecurity is the same as the data that we saw at our last meeting. Is that correct? Yes, that's my understanding. So, and it's interesting because I just checked back on the minutes from that last meeting, and we were satisfied at that meeting about the risk for waste contract moving to substantial. And so in terms of perhaps, so that suggests to me that it's the presentation that's confusing us again, so reinforces the idea. So perhaps the dates that these audits were done would help us to rediscuss, you know, prevent us rediscussing points that we have previously discussed. Because we'd be able to see at a glance, this must have been in the report last time, we must have been satisfied last time, do we need to rehash this? It is just interesting that we did discuss the waste contract, exactly this information about the waste contract last time, and we weren't concerned about it. This time we are. It's just an interesting observation. If the dates were in there, we might have felt differently about it. I don't know, so I'm just suggesting that.
Thank you. David Curtis, portfolio holder, would you like to come forward and speak on cyber risks?
Just very briefly, yes. I always find these meetings slightly curious because I'm the portfolio holder but not actually on the committee. However, I've listened to the concerns that have been raised, and I think perhaps, Chair, if I can have a conversation with you at some other point and also with Paul, and I share your concerns, particularly over the waste contract. Cyber risk, there was, as we know, or most of us probably know, there was another hack, Tewkesbury Council recently. There are substantial risks involved. We have about, I think it's 1,300 attempted hacks every week in this council. So what I'd suggest is that I take this offline with you, Chair, and with Paul, and we look at where there are directions or moves in the wrong direction. We do look at having some sort of narrative explanation behind that, and I think that would reassure the committee in future. That's really all I wanted to say. I was in agreement completely. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Curtis. Any further comments? So I'm going to go, the recommendation is the progress report be noted. May I please add, but at the next meeting, more information will come back on cyber risks and on the waste contract. Is that okay with everyone? Please. Okay, so can I have a proposer for that, please? Councillor Wally-Hoggins and a seconder, please. Councillor Shenton. All those in favour? Thank you very much. That's unanimous. Thank you. I'm very much aware it's nearly 6 o'clock and we will have to make a decision about how we continue. But does anyone need a break now?
I am a little concerned about the weather, actually, if I'm honest, looking at the weather forecast and how much rain is actually falling out of the sky. And some of us have quite difficult journeys to undertake. I'm not the only one sitting around the table with that consideration.
So can we speedily move on? Is that okay? At 10 to 6, I will have to make an announcement. Oh, it's 3 hours. I beg your pardon. I thought it was 2. Okay, let's move on to item 11, which is on page 301, and it's update on external audit of the statement of accounts. Yeah. And I think, is that David or Richard? It's Richard. Richard, may I bring you in, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. At the previous meeting of this committee, the outstanding statement of accounts that still hadn't been signed off was discussed, and the fact there was a national backlog of audits still to be completed. And I said I'd bring an update paper to this meeting, and this is that paper. When it was discussed back in July, there was a backstop date of the 30th of September. The legislation that would have given us that backstop date was due to be heard on the day the election was called. So it never happened. So there is legislation that auditors and ourselves work to that we have to keep to. And to override that legislation, there has to be subsequent legislation that gives alternative dates. Now, following that meeting, the very next day, I received the correspondence that I've attached at Appendix 1 from Jim McMahon that details out the revised proposals and the revised dates. Now, I've included those dates within the report that I present, so I've sort of tried to summarise it. That legislation is due to be heard on the 30th of September, next week, which happens to be the last date that the audit accounts for 23-24 need to be signed off by. So that legislation has to happen, otherwise we will be contravening the current legislation that's not been overridden with updated legislation. It's all rather confusing, rather time limiting, but what it does mean is there isn't time to do a full audit on the 21-22 and the 22-23 accounts. So the auditors will be issuing a disclaimed opinion. So I'm here today to sort of update on the update, because I've had a meeting with our auditors for those final account years, which is 21, 22, 22, 23, because our auditors have changed to a ZET from Ernst & Young for the 23-24 accounts. So having had that meeting with Ernst & Young, they are going to issue an audit completion report, which I will circulate to this committee, and it will hopefully be before the next meeting. But to the next meeting, I will bring both the 21, 22 accounts, the 22, 23 statement, and I'll seek delegated authority in conjunction with the chair of this committee to sign those accounts off with the disclaimed opinions as received. Now, the date of the next meeting is the 18th of November. The backstop date that hopefully will be agreed next week for those years accounts is the 13th of December, Friday the 13th, as it happens. If we miss that date, there is no backstop date after that. The full audit will have to be completed for those years in the traditional manner, and that we don't have the time or the audit capacity to complete those audits. So that's the update for, and you know, the recommendation is, as stated, that it's for noting, and that these reports and statements will come to the next Audit and Standards Committee. Unless there's any questions.
Councillors, do you have anything to say? Councillor Shunt.
Yeah, I'm still... I'm learning. Obviously, I've read this. I'm still slightly concerned that we would be contemplating signing off accounts that are with a. I know we won't be the only ones. There are lots of authorities in this position. In fact, we're one of the better authorities rather than one of the worst authorities, I think. But signing off accounts with a less than glowing opinion feels, you know, counter to what you and I, if you like, and members of the professional bodies have always been trained to do. So but it is what it is. It is, and it's you know, if they miss that back Friday the 13th, what could possibly go wrong?
Richard.
Yeah, if I could respond to that, yeah, I would love to have a perfectly signed off set of accounts. That is not going to happen. They don't have the resources to do it in the time that's available. The government have made a clear indication they want this backlog got rid of, and that's how this will overcome that. What it does mean is that a ZET's audit, which is due to be completed in February, I can't remember the date off the top of my head, it's in here, February the 28th, they can't rely on their opening balances. So again, theirs will be disclaimed, probably for another 2 years, until they've had an opportunity to go back and verify those brought forward figures. So it's not the end of it, but it's a position of, it's a way of moving forward on it, unfortunately.
I mean, our hands are tied, aren't they? Yeah. Councillor Ostrander.
It feels a bit like Ernst & Young are holding up our process. I mean, do we, or am I wrong in that? Do we have any leverage with them? I mean, it's their closing balances that we need for our new accounts, isn't it?
Yeah, the main problem came from the 2020-21 statement that dragged on far too long because of an infrastructure asset problem with the accounting treatment of those infrastructure assets, and there was a couple of other items. They were waiting for guidance from SITFA and from accounting bodies on how to treat those particular assets. That sort of concertinaed all the time that they had to do the subsequent years' audits, and they aren't resourced enough to play catch-up. In speaking with the lead auditor last week, I said, how many, this is just that one person within Ernst & Young, he's disclaiming 200 statements, just over 200 statements. So they're trying to get all of those done before the end of November. They don't want to take it into December. They don't want to go anywhere near December the 13th because they don't want to miss that deadline date. So they're working to disclaim over 200 statements themselves. Nationally, there's about 1,000 statements that are currently unaudited. So, yeah, that's the situation.
Any further? Oh, Councillor Shenton.
Thank you, Chair. Just to go back on this, we know that obviously the opening balances for this year aren't signed off, which means that the closing balances can't be signed off because of the impact, and that goes on and on, and for 2 years. In that 2 years, will those opening balances ever, in your opinion, get approved?
Yes, we're working with Audit, and there is a programme that they will go through to verify those opening balances. So if you were considering an asset, and we say we had vehicles, and the opening balance of the 23-24 accounts, it's their statement of accounts, said there were 10 vehicles, they would take it from the last audited set of accounts, and they would trace through that asset saying what were the additions and what were the disposals, how did you arrive at 10 vehicles. So that's what they're going to do for every single opening balance. So, but that takes time, that will be an additional cost, which is why it's not something that can be done overnight, and it will take up to 2 years to rectify.
Councillor Shenton.
And you bring us neatly to another question then. That additional cost, because we've already seen the audit costs go up significantly, and I know they are prescribed, if you like. Do we have any idea, any feel at this stage on the likely cost to the council of this?
I have seen some figures. They are around the £20,000 mark. It's not as bad as I thought they were going to be, but it does depend. That's very provisional because they need to obviously get into our statement and work out what needs to be verified. But certainly, as you were saying, as long as Audit does do a full audit in their years, they can be sure that all the figures within those years are correct. So it is a case of getting a team to go back and verify those opening balances.
Councillor Curtis, you wanted to come and say something. Please do.
Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, I think Richard would probably confirm this, but the additional £20,000 is within what we have in the budget. I believe that's so, Richard?
I do have sufficient within the audit budget that should cover it. Yeah.
And I've also sought reassurance from Richard that we will meet those deadline dates, because obviously if you look at point 17, authorities that failed to comply with the backstop will be sort of sent to the headmaster's office. But Richard has assured me that we will be able to meet those backstop dates, which hopefully does reassure the committee. Thank you, Chair.
May I ask a really naive question? Why is it costing us an extra £20,000 when it's not our fault? Is that a reasonable question to ask? I mean, why can't we bat it back and say, you made the mistake, you pay the money?
I've got to be careful what I say, but
it's a reasonable question, isn't it?
The audits that Ernst & Young haven't done in full, I haven't had an indication as to what they're going to charge for those years. Should I put it that way? So I've budgeted for a full audit. A full audit hasn't necessarily taken place. So that conversation needs to be had. So there may be a saving. That question has been asked, but I haven't seen an answer to it.
So it wasn't a naive question. Marcia.
Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, if we're straying into, or we're going to go into commercially sensitive areas, I prefer we didn't.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, yes, I perhaps shouldn't have. Go ask. Right, councillors, unless anybody has anything else to say, is The recommendation is that the updated position is noted. Can I have a proposer and a seconder, please? Proposer, Councillor Shenton. Seconder, Councillor Ostrander. All those in favour? Thank you very much. And I believe we're on the last item of the agenda, which is item 12, which is Accounting Policies Report 23-24. And this is Richard as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. In an attempt to get ahead of ourselves with a statement of accounts, I'll bring today the accounting policies that form the basis of those accounts. In previous years, these, well, and in current year, these form part of the statement of accounts and get approved as part of the process of approving the accounts. It is good practice to bring this before the statement is presented for the committee to have sight of and to approve. So it's basically the foundations, the accounting principles that the statement is prepared upon. Because clearly this statement, the 23-24 statement, we are looking to have audited by AZETS before, I've forgotten that date again, it's 25th of February next year.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the statement, like I say, these are the policies that will form the basis of the preparation of that statement.
Councillor Shenton.
Just a very quick one, Richard. Has anything major changed in the accounting policies in the last year that we should be aware of that within this document?
There's nothing major's changed. It does give the limits that we work to. I can't think of anything off the top of my head that's significantly changed. We've been a bit more robust on the investment properties that we currently hold, and we've sort of reclassified some of them that don't earn or they're not held for investment purposes. So that's the main areas on the assets that have changed.
Any further questions, councillors? Okay, so the recommendation is that the committee approve the accounting policies and key sources of estimation uncertainty that will be used to complete the 23-24 statement of accounts. Can I have a proposer, please? Councillor Shenton, seconder, Councillor Littlewood. All those in favour? Thank you. That's unanimous. So, councillors, item 13, councillor questions. I have had none received. Urgent business, I don't think there is any urgent business. The next meeting is on Monday, the 18th of November. And so there being no further business, I declare this Audit and Standards Committee meeting closed.